My name is Charlotte Williams. I am 30 years old, and exactly 2 hours ago, my sister-in-law leaned across a table covered in imported silk and called me a beggar. We were sitting in the grand ballroom of the Vanguard Hotel in Scottsdale, surrounded by 300 of Arizona's wealthiest corporate players. Victoria pressed her hands flat against the crisp linen tablecloth. Her diamond tennis bracelet caught the light from the overhead chandelier, sending a sharp flash across the crystal water goblets. Her eyes remained flat and hollow. She kept her voice pitched low, meant only for my ears. This venue is invite only for those who respect this family. You are a disgrace who married poor, and you are trespassing. I did not blink. I picked up my water goblet and let the icy condensation coat my fingertips. My sheer lack of a reaction seemed to suck the oxygen right out of her lungs. Behind Victoria, a chair scraped hard against the polished floorboards. My father stepped out from the head table, closing the distance between us with measured, heavy strides. Richard Williams wore a tuxedo tailored to project unquestioned authority, yet the rigid line of his jaw betrayed a frantic, underlying tension. He glared down at me with eyes that carried the familiar chill of winter frost. "Why is this beggar here?" He snapped the words loud enough for the adjacent tables to hear. Mid-sentence conversations died. The silence rippled outward, freezing the entire room. "Escort her out, now," he gestured over his shoulder. Two security guards in crisp, dark suits immediately pivoted toward our table, reaching for their earpieces. I finally looked up. I smoothed the immaculate fabric of my slate gray gown and glanced at the silver watch circling my left wrist. Before the guards could advance a single step, the hotel head of operations materialized from the shadowed archway. He wore a midnight blue suit and moved with a calm, deliberate grace. He did not look at my father. He ignored Victoria's outstretched hand. Bypassing the Williams family entirely, he took a firm, protective stance directly behind my chair. "How dare you?" the manager's voice boomed. The vaulted ceiling amplified his words, sending them crashing over the stunned guests. "This woman owns the Vanguard. She owns the land you parked your cars on, and she owns the holding company currently underwriting your corporate debt." I stood up. I met my father's stare and offered a slow, razor-thin smile. "You have no idea whose building you are standing in, do you?" The color drained from my father's face, leaving him ashen. Victoria took a staggering, unsteady step backward, her curated composure disintegrating in real time. In that breathless, suspended second, the power dynamic of the entire room shattered. Welcome back to Grape Echo Stories, where quiet people finally hand the receipts back to the families who threw them away. If you have ever been treated like a line item on your own family balance sheet, this story is yours too. Tell me how old you were when you realized conditional love is just a business transaction. Drop your age in the comments and be sure to subscribe, because you will want to hear how this empire falls. To understand how I bought the ground my family stood on, we have to rewind the clock. We have to go back to a freezing mahogany office, a cheap plastic compass, and the day I stopped being a daughter and became a rival. Exactly 8 years ago, it was a Tuesday in late August. Outside, the Arizona sun was baking the pavement, but inside my father's study, the air conditioning hummed at a sterile 65 degrees. The room smelled of lemon polish and expensive leather. My father sat behind his desk and slid a 50-page prenuptial agreement across the polished wood. The document was a corporate merger disguised as a marriage. He ordered me to marry a banking heir to secure a supply chain acquisition for Williams Corp. I kept my right hand in my pocket. My thumb traced the ridged edge of a cheap plastic compass. Julian had given it to me on our first anniversary. Julian designed municipal parks. He wore steel-toed boots and knew the scientific names of native desert plants. He did not have a trust fund. He had calluses on his hands and a laugh that made me feel safe. I pushed the heavy parchment paper back across the desk. "I am not signing this. I am marrying Julian." My father did not raise his voice. He did not throw a glass. He simply opened a leather-bound ledger on his desk and uncapped his silver fountain pen. He operated with the cold precision of a surgeon removing a dead limb. "You are a Williams." He spoke without looking up from his page. "This family is a corporation. You either generate value or you are liquidated. If you walk out that door, you are no longer a shareholder. You will have no name, you will have no accounts, you will be a stranger." I watched his pen hover over the thick paper. He was waiting for me to break. My entire childhood had been a series of audits grading my worth by the connections I could forge for his benefit. I took the plastic compass out of my pocket and set it down right on top of the unsigned prenup. I will take my chances as a stranger. My father finally looked at me. His expression was devoid of anything resembling grief. In business, Charlotte, you do not own the property. You own the paper underneath it. Out there, you own nothing. Let us see how long your little romance lasts when the foundation is removed. I walked out of the house with nothing but my purse. The heat hit me like a physical wall the second I cleared the heavy front doors. I drove my car to a gas station on the edge of the city, my hands shaking against the leather steering wheel. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a hollow, terrifying echo in my chest. I grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler and handed the cashier my silver credit card. The machine chirped a harsh, flat negative. Declined. I tried my backup card. Declined. The cashier looked at me with tired, impatient eyes as a line began to form behind me. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. The accounts were gone. They were not frozen. They were erased. The screen displayed a generic welcome message as if I had never been a customer. My father had not just cut me off. He had deleted my financial existence in under 20 minutes. I left the water on the counter and walked back to my car. I sat in the driver's seat watching the heat shimmer rise off the black asphalt. My family had 8 years to learn who I became after that Tuesday, and they spent those years pretending I was dead. They thought removing my foundation would bury me. They did not realize they had just taught me how to dig. I left the water bottle on the counter and walked out into the blinding afternoon glare. My car felt like a furnace. I drove away from the manicured lawns of Scottsdale and headed south toward central Phoenix. The transition was stark. The wide avenues lined with imported palm trees gave way to cracked asphalt and industrial strip malls. Julian lived in a cinder block apartment complex near the manufacturing district. The window air conditioning units hummed and rattled against the stucco walls. I walked up 2 flights of concrete stairs and knocked on a door with peeling paint. Julian opened it, holding a graphite drafting pencil. He wore faded denim and a white shirt dusted with soil from a site visit. He took one look at my face and pulled me inside. The apartment smelled like roasted coffee and drafting vellum. I sat on his faded fabric sofa and told him what happened. I told him my father erased my accounts and demanded I leave him. Julian did not offer empty platitudes. He walked into his small kitchen, poured a glass of tap water, and set it on the table in front of me. Then he sat beside me and took my hand. His palms were rough from years of planting trees and moving stone. He told me we would figure it out. There was no panic in his voice. He provided the exact anchor my family tried to cut. A week later, the reality of having zero capital set in. I held a degree in hospitality management from a top-tier university. I knew how to run luxury properties because I spent my childhood observing how they operated from the inside. I drafted a business plan for a boutique hospitality consultancy firm. I found a modest commercial space above a bakery downtown. The rent was cheap and the natural light was good. The leasing broker, a man named Davis, shook my hand on a Tuesday. We agreed on the terms. On Thursday, he stopped returning my calls. On Friday, I drove to his office and waited in his lobby until he was forced to see me. Davis could not look me in the eye. He sat behind his desk shuffling meaningless papers. He cleared his throat and said the owner decided to go in a different direction. I asked him for the truth. He stared at his desk blotter. "Your father plays golf with the managing partner of my brokerage," he said quietly. "The word is out. Anyone who signs a lease with Charlotte Williams loses the Williams Corporation account. I am sorry." My surname was a poison pill. My father had blacklisted me across the entire valley. The family did not stop with me. My brother Harrison had married a woman named Victoria 3 years prior. Victoria was a former Texas pageant queen who treated Scottsdale high society like a tactical battlefield. She viewed my exile as a public relations liability that needed to be contained. If I succeeded outside the family, it made the Williams empire look weak. She decided to go after Julian. Julian had spent 2 years securing a municipal contract to redesign a public botanical garden. It was his breakthrough project. One morning, his foreman called. The city council had revoked the bid overnight. They cited anonymous concerns regarding his financial stability and operational capacity. Julian came home that afternoon with dust on his jeans and a tight line in his jaw. He dropped his hard hat on the kitchen counter. I knew Victoria planted the rumors. She played the charity circuit and knew exactly which council members to whisper to over expensive lunches. Julian did not blame me. He simply rolled up his blueprints and packed them away in a cardboard tube. His refusal to be angry made my guilt heavier. I brought the Williams' wrath down on the man I loved. I sat at the tiny Formica kitchen table that night, watching the neon sign from the street blink through the blinds. I realized my family was trying to starve us out. Playing by their rules, using my name in their city, was corporate suicide. We needed a blind spot. We needed a place where the Williams shadow did not reach. I opened my laptop and began searching county tax records for distressed commercial real estate. I ignored the luxury properties in Scottsdale. I looked for abandoned parcels miles outside the city limits. I searched for properties owned by out-of-state holding companies that my father and his lawyers would never bother to monitor. I found it on a Thursday night. It was a dilapidated motor lodge from the 1970s sitting on 10 acres of cracked desert dirt 2 hours north of the city. The roof of the main office was caving in. The pool was filled with tumbleweeds and fractured concrete, but it had commercial zoning and a grandfathered well for water. The out-of-state bank holding the deed just wanted it off their balance sheet. I did not have the capital to buy it, but I knew how to structure a master lease with an option to purchase. Julian and I sat on the floor and drained his savings account. Every single dollar he had earned building other people's gardens went into a cashier check. We formed a blind limited liability company masking our names behind a registered agent. We signed the lease and took possession of a ruin. The physical labor began the next morning. I traded my silk dresses for denim jeans and steel-toed work boots. The Arizona sun was brutal, baking the earth until it cracked. I spent the first month hauling broken drywall and pulling rusted nails from rotted wood beams. My hands blistered and bled. We could not afford specialized contractors, so we hired local day laborers. The crew boss was a man named Mike, who chewed tobacco and looked at me like a fragile joke. A girl with perfect posture trying to swing a sledgehammer. He assumed I would quit by noon. I earned his respect by showing up at 4 a.m. to mix cement alongside his crew before the heat peaked. I did not write checks from a shaded tent. I carried the weight. The eco-glamping retreat slowly started to take shape. We repurposed the structural bones of the motor lodge into luxury canvas pavilions with solar power arrays and high-end desert landscaping. Julian designed a drought-resistant paradise using native flora. He turned the cracked pool into a sunken fire pit lounge surrounded by agave and flowering cactus. It was a physical manifestation of resilience. While my family relied on artificial water-wasting estates, we built our foundation by integrating with the harsh, natural desert. We were a month away from our opening date. Our cash flow was non-existent. We ate rice and beans for dinner and slept on an air mattress in the unfinished office. If this failed, Julian and I would be left with nothing. Then a certified letter arrived at our dusty roadside mailbox. It was not addressed to me. It was addressed to our blind limited liability company. I opened the envelope standing in the dirt driveway. It was a legal injunction demanding a halt to all construction. The document cited an obscure environmental zoning violation regarding the desert tortoise habitat. I read the letterhead at the top of the page. The breath caught in my throat. It was the same law firm my father used for his corporate acquisitions. They did not know I owned the property. They just wanted the land for a corporate golf course expansion. They saw an anonymous startup holding a prime piece of desert real estate and assumed we were easy prey. My father and his lawyers were blindly stepping on my new life to pave over it for their own gain. The war had found me in the desert. I folded the heavy parchment paper and slid it into my back pocket. I realized that surviving was no longer enough. I had to learn how to fight back in the dark. I stood in the dirt driveway holding the legal injunction while the dry desert wind rattled the paper against my knuckles. The document demanded an immediate halt to our construction, citing an obscure environmental zoning violation regarding a desert tortoise habitat. I read the elegant embossed letterhead at the top of the page. My heart hammered a heavy, erratic rhythm against my ribs. It was the exact same corporate law firm my father utilized for his real estate acquisitions. Julian walked out of the unfinished office, wiping axle grease from his hands with a rag. He saw the color drain from my face and took the paper from my grip. He read it in silence. His jaw tightened. "They do not know we own this land," Julian said. "They just see an anonymous startup holding a prime piece of acreage they want for a golf course. We need to hire a lawyer. We can fight this in court." I shook my head. A legal battle requires capital we do not possess. More importantly, a lawsuit requires discovery. The moment my father realizes his exiled daughter is the primary stakeholder of this property, he will stop treating this like a standard acquisition. He will make it a personal vendetta. He will bury us in endless litigation until we default on our lease. We cannot fight him in a courtroom. We have to fight him in the shadows. That night, I lay awake on the deflated air mattress, listening to the coyotes howl across the scrub brush. I searched my memory for a weapon. My entire childhood had been spent silently observing my father conduct business from the back of his chauffeured town car or across the dinner table. He operated under the assumption that I was merely a decorative asset, paying no attention to the mechanics of his empire. I remembered a specific phone conversation from when I was 14 years old. My father was bragging to a city councilman about reducing maintenance costs at his flagship Paradise Valley Golf Resort. He was utilizing unapproved synthetic fertilizers to keep the putting greens unnaturally vibrant through the blistering summer heat. He routed the chemical purchases through a subsidiary shell company named Apex Holdings to bypass environmental protection audits. The next morning, I drove into the city and parked 3 blocks away from the Central Public Library. I paid for a temporary guest pass using cash. I sat at a communal computer terminal under flickering fluorescent lights, pulling up county tax records and municipal water tables. The air smelled of old paper and stale coffee. I spent 4 hours tracing the corporate structure of Apex Holdings, linking their supply chain directly to the Paradise Valley Resort. The property sat precariously close to a major municipal reservoir. I drafted a highly detailed, anonymous dossier outlining the chemical runoff threat. I printed the documents and placed them in 2 manila envelopes. I mailed one to the State Environmental Protection Agency. I mailed the other to a hungry local investigative journalist who held a well-known public grudge against Scottsdale developers. We returned to hauling drywall and mixing cement. 10 days later, a news van parked outside the Paradise Valley Resort. The journalist broke the story during the evening broadcast, citing an anonymous whistleblower. The Environmental Protection Agency announced an immediate federal inquiry into Williams Corporation. My father was forced into a frantic public relations nightmare. His legal team scrambled to contain the fallout. 3 days after the broadcast, the injunction against our desert property was quietly withdrawn. They abandoned the golf course expansion to focus on their own survival. We won the land war without ever stepping inside a courtroom or spending a single dollar on legal fees. Our eco-glamping retreat opened in October just as the desert weather cooled into crisp, starry nights. We did not have a marketing budget. We relied on the raw beauty of the landscape. A prominent travel influencer booked a weekend stay under a pseudonym, seeking an escape from the city. She posted a single video of our sunken fire pit lounge, surrounded by blooming agave and the silent canyon walls. The video garnered 3 million views in 48 hours. Our booking platform crashed from the sudden influx of web traffic. Within a week, we were reserved solid for the next 18 months. The cash flow was staggering. We lived on the same modest budget and funneled every single dollar of profit back into our anonymous holding company. We purchased a canyon property in Sedona. We acquired a dilapidated hot springs resort in New Mexico and transformed it into an exclusive wellness sanctuary. 8 years passed in a blur of blueprints and board meetings. It was now the spring of 2026. I was 30 years old, and my holding company controlled a portfolio of the most lucrative boutique resorts across the American Southwest. I operated strictly from the shadows, utilizing non-disclosure agreements and trusted proxies. The industry knew my company name, but they had no idea a discarded heiress sat at the helm. I stood in my corner office in downtown Phoenix, looking out over the city skyline. I wanted a crown jewel for our portfolio. The Vanguard Hotel had just entered the market. It was an iconic, historic property in the heart of Scottsdale. Acquiring it would solidify our dominance in the luxury sector. I directed my executive team to prepare a blind bid. My chief financial officer, a brilliant analytical man named Marcus, requested a secure meeting later that afternoon. He walked into my office carrying a sleek, encrypted tablet. He closed the heavy oak door behind him and locked it. The click of the deadbolt echoed in the quiet room. "We have a primary rival for the Vanguard," Marcus said. He did not sit down. His posture was rigid. Williams Corporation just submitted a competing bid. A cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach. A bidding war against my father was the exact scenario I had spent 8 years meticulously avoiding. If we pushed too hard, we risked exposing my identity. "We need to withdraw," I said, keeping my voice level. "Let them have it. I will not engage in a public auction with Richard Williams." Marcus shook his head and slid the tablet across my glass desk. "You need to look at this before you make a decision. My audit team ran a deep forensic analysis on their corporate structure to anticipate their spending cap. We bypassed their public filings and looked at their secondary vendor accounts." I picked up the tablet. The screen displayed a complex web of financial ledgers and debt ratios. The numbers painted a terrifying picture. "They are not expanding from a position of strength," Marcus explained. "They are bidding from a corner. Williams Corporation is a mirage. Their core real estate assets are severely overleveraged. They are hemorrhaging capital on a daily basis. Your father is utilizing predatory short-term loans to mask the losses from his shareholders. This bid for the Vanguard is a desperate theatrical attempt to project stability to the market." I stared at the glowing screen. The empire that had cast me out into the dirt was collapsing under its own weight. My father was broke. "If they do not acquire the Vanguard to secure a new line of credit," Marcus said quietly, "they will face total insolvency within 6 months." I set the tablet down. The knot in my stomach uncoiled, replaced by a chilling, strategic clarity. I realized I did not just have the capital to outbid my father for a hotel. I had the power to buy his very survival. The man who taught me that you only own the paper underneath the property was about to learn that I had become the bank. I stared at the glowing tablet resting on my glass desk. Marcus stood silent near the doorway, waiting for my authorization. The digital ledger displayed the exact sum required to purchase the secondary debt of Williams Corporation. It was a staggering figure. To fund the transaction, I needed to liquidate a substantial portion of our original holding company assets. I picked up the digital stylus. The smooth, cool plastic felt foreign in my grip. My mind drifted away from the climate-controlled executive suite. I closed my eyes and felt the phantom sting of fiberglass insulation biting into my forearms. To become the bank, I had to remember what real equity actually cost. I thought back to the sweltering afternoon Julian and I pooled our depleted savings. We sat on the floor of his cramped apartment staring at a laptop screen. We drained his checking account and emptied the meager cash reserves I had hidden away. The final transfer left us with $42.16 to our names. We did not use the funds to acquire a luxury property in a prime zip code. We secured a master lease on a forgotten, dilapidated desert motel sitting on a cracked stretch of highway 2 hours north of the city. The first time we walked the property, the smell of rotting timber and baked asphalt hit my lungs like a physical blow. The roof of the main office sagged under the weight of decades of neglect. Tumbleweeds choked the drained swimming pool. My father operated in a world of artificial environments. He built golf courses that required millions of gallons of stolen water to maintain an unnatural emerald green in the middle of a drought. He forced the landscape to bend to his will, using his limitless checkbook. We did not have a checkbook. We had to integrate with the harsh reality of the desert. The alarm clock screamed every morning at 4. I traded my tailored dresses for thick denim and steel-toed boots. The physical toll of the work was grueling. I learned how to haul heavy sheets of drywall before the sun breached the horizon. I carried the chalky, cumbersome boards across uneven dirt paths, my shoulders screaming under the weight. The desert heat arrived by 8 in the morning, baking the earth until it radiated like an open oven. Sweat stung my eyes and soaked through my shirt. Blisters formed on my palms, burst and hardened into thick calluses. Every time my muscles threatened to give out, I pictured my father sitting in his immaculate study, judging my worth by the name on a piece of paper. The anger fueled my endurance. Building the eco-glamping retreat required materials we could barely afford. The logistical nightmare peaked during our third week of construction. A local supplier named Harlan arrived, in a rusted flatbed truck, hauling the specialized canvas required for our luxury pavilions. I walked out to meet him, wiping dirt from my forehead. Harlan did not turn off his engine. He leaned out of the driver's side window and spat a dark stream of tobacco onto the dust. "The price of commercial canvas went up," he stated. His voice was gravelly and unyielding. "I need an extra $2,000 on the invoice or I keep the shipment on the truck." My stomach plummeted. We did not have $2,000. A week prior, I might have panicked. My corporate training had taught me to call a finance department and authorize an override. Out here in the dirt, those rules did not apply. I walked closer to the truck. I looked at the worn tread on his front tires and the faded logo on his door panel. "We signed a contract for the agreed rate," I said, keeping my tone level. "Contracts mean nothing if the material stays on my flatbed," he replied, resting his arm on the door frame. "You are a nameless startup building a campsite in the middle of nowhere. You do not have leverage." I stepped onto the running board of his truck, forcing him to look me in the eye. "I do not have $2,000 today," I told him, holding his gaze. "But I know the hospitality supply chain. In 6 months, this property will be operational. In 12 months, we will be breaking ground on a second location in Sedona. I will need 10 times this amount of canvas. If you drop this shipment at the contracted rate, you become my exclusive regional supplier for the next 5 years. If you drive away, I will find a competitor and ensure you never see a dime of our expansion." Harlan studied my face. He looked for a bluff and found nothing but raw grit. The silence stretched over the hum of the idle engine. He shifted the truck into park and cut the ignition. "Show me where you want the pallets," he grumbled. I stepped down from the truck, my pulse hammering in my ears. I had negotiated my first major logistical hurdle without a cent of family money. The environment itself was our next adversary. As we erected the final canvas pavilions, a sudden microburst swept across the valley. The sky turned a bruised purple. The wind howled, tearing through the canyon with terrifying speed. Dust blinded us. Julian and I scrambled across the property, securing tie-downs and driving steel stakes deeper into the hardened earth. The structures bowed under the relentless pressure of the gale. We stood back to back, bracing a central support pole while the storm battered the canvas. The storm passed as quickly as it arrived, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. We walked the perimeter, coughing on the suspended dust. The eco-tent stood firm. The native, drought-resistant landscaping Julian had meticulously planted absorbed the flash rain. The property did not fight the desert. It survived by bending with it. It was a physical manifestation of our own resilience. We launched the booking platform on a Tuesday. We sat in the refurbished main office, illuminated only by the glow of a laptop screen and the blinking light of our rural internet router. We had no marketing budget. We relied on a few strategic invitations sent to independent travel writers. For 3 days, the screen remained agonizingly static. The silence was deafening. On Friday evening, the notification chime rang. It was a single reservation. An hour later, the chime rang twice. By midnight, the sound was a continuous rapid-fire chorus. A prominent travel influencer had posted a short, unedited video of our sunken fire pit lounge under the vast, unpolluted canopy of desert stars. The raw authenticity of the property resonated with an audience exhausted by artificial luxury. The booking system struggled to keep pace. We were sold out for the entire season within 48 hours. The cash flow was immediate and staggering. It was not leveraged debt or corporate credit. It was viral, untraceable revenue pouring directly into our anonymous holding company. That initial surge of capital funded our second property, then our third. We built an empire entirely under the radar, fueled by the grueling logistics of the hospitality industry and the sweat equity of our own hands. I opened my eyes, returning to the present moment in my Phoenix executive suite. The phantom ache in my shoulders faded, replaced by the cold, hard reality of the digital ledger in front of me. The cash we generated from the dirt was real. My father built his legacy on a foundation of hollow paper. I pressed the stylus against the screen and signed my name. "Execute the purchase," I told Marcus, "by every single cent of the Williams Corporation's secondary debt." Marcus nodded and tapped a confirmation key on his device. "The transaction is complete," he said. "You are officially their largest creditor." A sharp knock on my office door interrupted the quiet triumph. My executive assistant stepped into the room holding a thick, cream-colored envelope. She looked confused. "This bypassed the standard mail screening," she said, handing it to me. "A courier delivered it directly to the front desk." I flipped the heavy envelope over. The paper was expensive, deeply textured, and sealed with dark red wax. The familiar Williams family crest was stamped into the center. I broke the seal and pulled out the card. The elegant calligraphy looped across the page, requesting my presence at the Vanguard Hotel for a corporate anniversary gala. The bottom line was underlined in sharp black ink: Charlotte Williams, no +1. The trap was funded, the debt was mine, and now my family was demanding I walk directly into their crosshairs. I held the thick cream-colored envelope, weighing the heavy cardstock in my hands. The embossed lettering caught the ambient light of my executive office. Charlotte Williams, no +1. Julian arrived an hour later. He walked into my office wearing a tailored charcoal suit, a stark contrast to the dust-covered denim he wore during our desert years. We had built this empire together. He ran the architectural division of our holding company, overseeing the physical design of every new property. He saw the envelope sitting on the glass desk, and his jaw tightened. I told him they invited me to the anniversary gala. Julian picked up the invitation. He read the restrictive line at the bottom. "They do not want you there," he said, keeping his voice even. "They want a prop." He was right. My father despised failure, but he feared public scandal even more. Our financial intelligence indicated Richard was courting a conservative private equity billionaire named Sterling to secure a bailout. Sterling valued traditional family unity above all else. A fractured dynasty was a liability. My father needed to parade his exiled daughter across a ballroom to prove he was a benevolent, forgiving patriarch. He needed the market to believe the Williams family was whole. I took the invitation back. "I am going to RSVP, yes," I told him. Julian looked at me. His eyes were calm, steady, and devoid of fear. "You do not owe them a performance," he reminded me. "I am not performing for them," I replied. "I am inspecting my new acquisition." The next morning, I summoned Marcus back to my office. We needed to guarantee my father remained blind to the Vanguard ownership until the trap snapped shut. Richard possessed a predatory instinct for corporate espionage. If he dug into the holding company that recently purchased his secondary debt, he might connect the shell corporations back to me. We needed a diversion. I instructed Marcus to manufacture a controlled leak. I wanted doctored financial documents quietly circulated through the localized banking channels my father monitored. The fabricated ledgers would indicate my anonymous holding company was suffering a severe liquidity crisis. The documents suggested we were overextended and teetering on the edge of collapse. "Give him blood in the water," I told Marcus. "Make him believe his unseen competitor is dying. Arrogance is his primary vulnerability. If he thinks we are failing, he will stop looking at us and focus entirely on his own survival party." Marcus executed the leak flawlessly. Within 48 hours, our localized corporate spies reported that Richard had intercepted the fake financials. He swallowed the bait. Believing the threat was neutralized, my father redirected his remaining capital into the anniversary gala. He was funding his own execution. 3 days before the event, the Vanguard Hotel shifted into high gear. The property was a masterpiece of restored desert Art Deco architecture. I managed the daily operations from an unlisted executive suite on the top floor, utilizing non-disclosure agreements for the entire senior staff. My general manager was a man named David. He had been with us since the early days of the eco-glamping retreat. He knew my history. He knew the stakes. On a Tuesday afternoon, Victoria arrived at the Vanguard for a final walkthrough of the grand ballroom. I sat in my shadowed office watching the high-definition security feed on my wall monitor. Victoria strutted through the double doors, flanked by 2 nervous event planners. She wore designer sunglasses indoors and pointed a manicured finger at the ceiling fixtures. David met her in the center of the room. He wore a flawless tailored suit and carried a digital clipboard. I turned up the audio feed. Victoria did not offer a greeting. She immediately launched into a tirade regarding the floral arrangements. "The orchids are the wrong shade of white," she snapped. "They look cheap. I specifically demanded imported Cascadian blooms. I do not care what your absentee owner budgeted for the seasonal displays. Fix it." David offered a polite, deferential nod, the perfect picture of hospitality. "We will have them replaced by this evening, madam," he said. His tone was smooth and wholly unbothered. Victoria paced across the parquet flooring, her heels clicking sharp and fast. She inspected the table settings, trailing a finger over the crystal goblets. She complained about the ambient lighting. She criticized the acoustics. She treated David and his staff like indentured servants operating under the delusion that her family wealth granted her supreme authority over the space. It took every ounce of my restraint not to pick up the radio and terminate her reservation. But premature revenge is a fool errand. I watched her demand a revised seating chart. She stopped at a round table positioned near the swinging doors of the catering kitchen. "This is table 72, she noted, checking a leather-bound planner. "Who is seated here?" David referenced his screen. "That is reserved for Charlotte Williams, madam." Victoria smiled. It was a cold, hollow expression. "Perfect," she murmured. "Leave it exactly there. Ensure the servers use that specific door as frequently as possible. I want her to feel every single draft." David looked up at the security camera mounted in the corner of the room. He knew I was watching. He offered a microscopic nod. "As you wish, madam," he replied. I leaned back in my leather chair. Victoria believed she was orchestrating a petty humiliation. She had no idea she was arranging the exact staging ground for her own destruction. By placing me at the worst table in the room, she was ensuring the impending power reversal would hit with maximum public impact. The logistics of the trap were set. I needed armor. I did not visit the boutiques in Scottsdale where the local elite purchased their evening wear. I contacted an independent designer in Los Angeles. I requested a custom gown. I specified slate gray raw silk, no logos, no ostentatious embellishments. I wanted the garment to project quiet, undeniable wealth, the kind of wealth that does not need to shout to be recognized. The dress arrived in a garment bag the day before the gala. I unzipped the canvas and ran my hand over the immaculate fabric. It felt like cold water. It was the exact opposite of the synthetic pageant dresses Victoria favored. It was a uniform built for corporate warfare. Julian stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching me inspect the gown. He walked over and wrapped his arms around my shoulders, resting his chin on my head. "You do not have to endure this," he said softly. "We have the debt. You can foreclose on them tomorrow morning from the comfort of this house. You can let the lawyers deliver the blow." I turned around and looked into his eyes. He understood the psychological toll this family exacted. He knew the scars they left behind. "Lawyers deal in paper," I told him. "My father values paper above people. If a proxy delivers the foreclosure, he will blame the market. He will blame the economy. He will construct a narrative where he is the victim of a hostile corporate takeover. I will not allow him that comfort. He needs to look across a room and understand that the daughter he threw away is the architect of his ruin." Julian nodded slowly. He kissed my forehead. "Then you show them who you became," he said. The night of the gala arrived with a suffocating dry heat. The sun dipped below the desert horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and burnt orange. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my Vanguard executive suite. The slate gray gown fit flawlessly. I clasped the silver watch around my left wrist. It was a vintage timepiece, understated and precise. I did not wear a necklace. I did not wear earrings. I let the absence of decoration speak for itself. David knocked twice and opened the suite door. He held a leather folio containing the final secondary debt acquisition files. The ink on the transfer documents was dry. Williams Corporation legally belonged to me. "The guests have arrived," he informed me. "Your father is currently holding court near the main bar. The target investor, Sterling, is seated at the head table. The room is at capacity." I took a deep breath, letting the chilled air of the suite fill my lungs. The phantom ache of the desert dirt, the memory of declined credit cards, the echo of my father's cold ultimatums, they all hardened into a single sharpened point of focus. I took the folio from David and handed it back to him. "Keep this close," I instructed. "When the time comes, distribute copies to every investor at the head table. Do not miss a single one." David offered a rare, genuine smile. "It will be my distinct pleasure." I turned toward the door. The 8-year exile was over. It was time to attend the party. The private elevator descended with a whisper. I stood alone in the brushed steel car, watching the digital numbers tick downward. My reflection stared back from the polished doors. the slate gray raw silk draped perfectly, holding its shape without effort. I breathed in the crisp, filtered air of the cab. In a few seconds, those doors would open, and I would step into a theater designed to break me. The elevator chimed. The doors slid apart, revealing the grand foyer of the Vanguard. A wall of sound hit me, the low hum of 300 voices overlapping the clinking of crystal and a string quartet playing in the far corner. I stepped out onto the imported marble flooring. The lighting was dialed to a warm amber, casting a golden glow over the assembled corporate elite of Scottsdale. This was my father's chosen arena. It was also my building. I walked past the coat check, handing the attendant a digital token. He recognized me. His posture straightened, and he offered a microscopic, deferential nod before taking a step back. I moved toward the main ballroom entrance. The immediate reaction to my presence was palpable. It started near the doorway. A vice president from my father logistics division caught sight of me. His sentence died in his throat. The silence infected the group next to him. Like a stone dropped into a still pond, the quiet rippled outward. Heads turned, eyes darted toward my slate gray gown, measuring, calculating, and judging. I kept my chin level and my stride unbroken. I knew exactly how to navigate this ecosystem. If you show hesitation, they circle. If you show fear, they strike. My aunt spotted me first. She was my father's sister, a woman who treated social climbing as a competitive sport. She detached herself from a circle of banking executives and intercepted my path. She wore a suffocating emerald gown and held a flute of champagne. Her smile was painted on tight and brittle. "Charlotte," she cooed, projecting her voice so the nearest tables could hear. "What a surprise! We all assumed you would decline. It takes a certain bravery to show up tonight." I stopped and met her gaze. "Good evening." She scanned my dress, looking for a designer label, and finding nothing but pristine silk, her eyes flicked toward the empty space beside me. "And where is Julian? Is he still digging in the dirt? It must be so difficult making ends meet in this economy. We all pray for you both." Her faux sympathy was a weapon designed to draw blood. I did not give her the satisfaction of a defensive reply. I offered a calm, measured smile. "Julian is thriving," I said. "We find that working with the earth provides a much stronger foundation than relying on paper. Enjoy your champagne." I bypassed her before she could formulate a response, leaving her standing frozen, holding her crystal flute. I entered the main ballroom. The scale of the space was breathtaking. I had approved the architectural renderings months ago, but seeing it filled with people brought the design to life. Yet as I moved through the crowd, the deep financial audit my team conducted last week colored everything I saw. The sprawling Williams dynasty was a mirage, and the cracks were visible if you knew where to look. I observed the catering stations. To the untrained eye, the spread looked opulent. But I knew the hospitality supply chain. The caviar was domestic, not imported. The floral centerpieces Victoria had screamed about earlier were padded with inexpensive synthetic greenery hidden beneath the primary blooms. Even the premium scotch being poured at the open bar was housed in decanters masking a mid-tier brand. My father was cutting corners. The man who once demanded nothing but absolute perfection was bleeding cash. He was staging a theatrical production of wealth using a depleted budget. The over-leveraged loans and desperate shell games were manifesting in the room. He was trying to project strength while standing on a rotting floor. I spotted him near the head table. Richard Williams stood in the center of a dense cluster of executives. He was speaking with forced enthusiasm, holding a glass of amber liquid. Beside him sat Sterling, the conservative billionaire investor whose capital could save the Williams empire. Sterling looked bored. He tapped his index finger against the tablecloth, his expression unreadable. My father leaned in closer, faking a laugh at something Sterling said. The desperation radiating from my father was a physical force. The balance of power had shifted so drastically he did not even realize he was performing on my stage. I continued toward the back of the room. Victoria had assigned me to table 72. I found it nestled directly adjacent to the swinging wooden doors of the catering kitchen. It was the worst seat in the house. Every time a server entered or exited, a harsh draft swept across the table carrying the scent of dish soap and heated metal. The placement was a deliberate, calculated insult. I pulled out my own chair and sat down. The table was empty. No one else wanted to be seated near the exiled daughter. I was a quarantine zone. A waiter approached carrying a silver pitcher of ice water. He stopped beside my chair. I recognized him. His name was Thomas. He had worked at my Sedona property before transferring to the Vanguard. He poured the water into my crystal goblet. "Is the draft too severe, madam?" he asked, his voice pitched low enough that the neighboring tables could not hear. "I can adjust the kitchen airflow output from the control panel." I looked up at Thomas. His eyes burned with a fierce, quiet loyalty. He knew exactly what this family had done to me. "Leave the airflow as it is, Thomas," I replied softly. "I want to remember exactly where they tried to put me. But please bring me a glass of sparkling water with a twist of lemon." "Certainly, madam." He bowed his head and vanished through the swinging doors. I sat perfectly straight in my chair, resting my hands in my lap. I did not look down at my phone. I did not feign interest in the centerpieces. I simply existed in this space, forcing the room to deal with my presence. The surrounding guests cast sideways glances, throwing hushed whispers behind their hands. I let them whisper. They were evaluating a ghost. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The low hum of conversation faded into an expectant silence. At the head table, my father stepped up to a polished wooden podium. He tapped the microphone twice. The sharp, rhythmic thumps echoed across the vaulted ceiling, demanding attention. He adjusted his tuxedo jacket and looked out over the sea of faces. His gaze swept across the room, deliberately bypassing the wealthy investors, the local politicians, and the corporate sycophants. His eyes locked directly onto me. The chill in his stare bridged the distance between the head table and the kitchen doors. He gripped the edges of the podium, his knuckles turning white. The public relations team needed a show of family unity to appease Sterling. My father needed to spin a narrative of a benevolent patriarch forgiving his wayward child. But looking at me, sitting unbothered in a raw silk gown, he could not mask his resentment. He leaned into the microphone. The trap was primed. The audience held its breath, waiting for the patriarch to speak. The final performance was about to begin. The microphone hummed a low, resonant frequency across the grand ballroom. My father adjusted the lapels of his tuxedo and gripped the edges of the wooden podium. He looked out over the sea of corporate elite, his expression shifting into a mask of benevolent authority. He knew how to command a room. He had spent 4 decades perfecting the art of the executive monologue. "We gather tonight, not just to celebrate a corporate milestone," he began, his voice smooth and heavily practiced. "We gather to celebrate the enduring strength of the Williams legacy. In an era where empires rise and fall on the whims of a volatile market, we have remained steadfast. We build on solid ground. We honor tradition. We protect our own." I sat at table 72, listening to the hollow echo of his lies. He spoke of solid ground, but I knew the exact structural integrity of the floor beneath him. Years ago, in a freezing mahogany office, he taught me the most ruthless lesson of his career. He told me that in business, you do not own the property. You own the paper underneath it. I took that lesson and weaponized it. 3 weeks prior to this gala, I sat in a secure boardroom in Denver, Colorado. I did not meet with hospitality executives or real estate developers. I met with a man named Donovan, who ran a predatory venture capital firm known for stripping distressed assets. Donovan was a shark who operated in the murky waters of secondary corporate debt. I transferred a staggering sum of untraceable capital into his firm through a series of blind trusts. I gave Donovan a single directive: buy the leash. Williams Corporation was surviving on a web of high-yield short-term loans. My father had leveraged his primary commercial properties to mask his operational losses. The banks were beginning to panic. Donovan swept the secondary markets, quietly purchasing those toxic liabilities through dummy corporations. My father's finance department assumed they were simply restructuring their debt with a standard vulture fund. They had no idea the vulture was feeding from my hand. I purchased every outstanding note, every line of credit, and every mortgage tied to the Williams name. I owned the paper, but holding the weapon was only half the strategy. I needed my father to walk onto the battlefield unarmed. If he sensed a hostile takeover, he would have deployed his defense attorneys and locked the company in years of litigation. I needed him blind, arrogant, and compliant. I instructed Marcus, my chief financial officer, to manufacture a digital ghost. We created a parallel set of doctored financial ledgers for our own holding company. These fake documents painted a grim picture. They indicated my eco-glamping resorts had expanded too fast. The false ledgers showed severe liquidity issues, plunging revenues, and impending defaults. We left these documents on a localized server with a deliberate security flaw. My father employed a team of corporate fixers whose sole purpose was to monitor local competitors. It took them less than 4 days to find the backdoor Marcus left open. They extracted the fake financials and delivered them directly to my father. Our internal intelligence verified his reaction. Richard Williams celebrated. He looked at the fabricated numbers and saw exactly what his ego demanded to see. He saw his exiled daughter failing in the dirt. He believed the anonymous holding company threatening his market share was bleeding out. His arrogance became his fatal blind spot. Convinced that his unseen rival was collapsing, my father felt safe draining his final reserves of liquid cash to throw this anniversary gala. He rented the Vanguard Hotel to stage a theatrical illusion of prosperity. He financed his own execution, believing he had already won the war. At the podium, my father raised his glass of scotch. The amber liquid caught the stage lights. "A legacy is only as strong as the family that upholds it," he continued, projecting his voice toward the head table. I shifted my gaze to the man sitting directly to the right of the podium, Sterling. He was an older billionaire with silver hair and a reputation for ruthless conservatism. Sterling was the white knight my father desperately needed. If Sterling injected his private equity into Williams Corporation, the company might actually survive the fiscal year. But Sterling had a well-documented mandate. He refused to invest in fractured dynasties. He viewed family estrangement as a metric of poor leadership. A man who could not command the loyalty of his own children could not be trusted to manage a billion-dollar portfolio. That was the only reason the embossed invitation had arrived at my doorstep. My father did not want a reconciliation. He needed a prop. He needed to parade me in front of Sterling to prove the Williams family was a united, unbreakable front. He invited me to play the role of the tragic, repentant daughter who had learned her lesson and crawled back to the safety of the golden cage. "True strength requires forgiveness," my father said, his tone dropping into a practiced register of synthetic warmth. "It requires the wisdom to guide those who have wandered astray back into the fold. It requires us to open our doors to the prodigal members of our flock and remind them where they belong." The room grew exceedingly quiet. The ambient noise of clinking silver and hushed whispers evaporated. 300 pairs of eyes tracked my father's gaze. He was no longer looking at Sterling. He was looking directly at table 72. He was looking at me. The spotlight shifted. The physical weight of the entire ballroom settled onto my shoulders. This was the transaction. He was offering me a public pardon in exchange for my submission. "Charlotte," my father said. His voice echoed through the speakers, stripped of any pretense. The demand was naked and sharp. "Stand up." He wanted me to rise. He wanted me to lower my head and accept his conditional grace in front of the local elite. He needed Sterling to see the exiled daughter bow to the patriarch. I remained seated in my chair. I did not break eye contact. I rested my hand smoothly in my lap. The slate-gray silk of my gown pooled perfectly around me. The silence stretched, turning fragile and dangerous. 10 seconds passed, then 20. The guests sitting at the adjacent tables held their breath, unsure if they were witnessing a touching reunion or a public execution. "Stand up, Charlotte," my father repeated. The synthetic warmth was gone. His tone clipped, the edge of genuine anger. I reached for my crystal goblet. I took a slow, deliberate sip of sparkling water. The ice clinked softly against the glass, sounding like a gunshot in the silent room. I set the goblet down and simply looked at him. "I will not stand for a bankrupt king." I did not say the words out loud. I let my posture deliver the message. The refusal was absolute. I was rejecting the core mythology of his entire existence. I was denying him the one asset he could not purchase with leveraged debt: control. A murmur rippled through the back of the ballroom. Sterling shifted in his seat at the head table, his silver eyebrows drawing together in a tight line of disapproval. He smelled the fracture. The illusion of family unity was cracking under the grand chandelier. My father gripped the podium. His face flushed a dark, dangerous shade of crimson. He opened his mouth to speak, but the fury choked the words in his throat. His perfectly curated public relations event was spiraling into a disaster. At the head table, Victoria could no longer contain herself. Her chair scraped violently against the floorboards. She stood up, her diamond tennis bracelet flashing under the lights. Her pageant smile was gone, replaced by a mask of raw, vindictive panic. If Sterling walked away, the company died. If the company died, Victoria lost her social throne. She could not allow me to destroy her kingdom with a glass of water and a silent stare. Victoria stepped down from the elevated platform. She bypassed the security detail and marched directly across the polished parquet floor. Her heels clicked a frantic, escalating rhythm. The room watched her descend like a bird of prey. She was coming to table 72 to force the submission my father could not command. The Cold War was over. The physical confrontation was inevitable. As Victoria marched across the polished parquet floor, my mind briefly detached from the immediate chaos of the grand ballroom. I watched the erratic rhythm of her designer heels and felt my pulse slow to a steady, calculated beat. I was not afraid of her anger. I was insulated by a foundation of unshakable certainty. To understand why I could sit motionless while the Williams empire mobilized against me, you have to understand the precise chain of events that triggered this collision. It started exactly 14 days ago, with a targeted delivery to my front door. Despite the staggering revenue generated by my holding company, Julian and I did not live in a sprawling Scottsdale mansion. We purchased a modest mid-century home in a quiet, historic Phoenix neighborhood. We preferred the shade of old-growth citrus trees to the sterile, manicured lawns of the ultra-wealthy. We kept our private life entirely separated from our corporate balance sheets. That isolation was breached on a quiet Tuesday morning. A private courier pulled up to our curb in a black town car. He bypassed the mailbox and walked directly to the front porch, holding a single thick envelope. I took the delivery and closed the door. The envelope was crafted from premium cream-colored cardstock. It carried a physical weight that bespoke expensive stationery. The familiar Williams family crest was pressed deep into the paper, sealed with dark red wax. I ran my thumb over the raised lettering. I did not need to open it to understand the tactical maneuver playing out inside my father's corporate headquarters. Our intelligence network had already confirmed my father was desperate. He was relentlessly courting the conservative private equity billionaire named Sterling. Sterling was a man who operated on rigid, traditional principles. He evaluated a corporate portfolio by examining the stability of the family running it. A fractured dynasty was a severe liability in his eyes. He refused to inject capital into a company where the patriarch could not command the loyalty of his own bloodline. My father's public relations team knew this. They understood that the rumors of my exile were circulating through the local financial sectors. To secure the bailout my father needed to stage a public spectacle of family unity, he needed to present a flawless, united front. I broke the red wax seal and pulled the invitation from the sleeve. The elegant black calligraphy requested my presence at the Williams Corporation Anniversary Gala. I scanned the formal language down to the bottom line. The final instruction was underlined in sharp, distinct ink. Charlotte Williams, no +1. This was not an olive branch. It was a casting call. They were demanding I show up alone, stripped of the husband they deemed beneath their social strata. They needed me to play the role of the tragic, repentant daughter. They wanted the local elite, and more importantly Sterling, to see me crawl back to the golden cage, begging for a fraction of the warmth my father pretended to offer. The entire gala was a theatrical production, designed to make Richard Williams look like a benevolent, forgiving patriarch. The back screen door creaked open. Julian stepped into the kitchen, wiping soil from his hands with a canvas towel. He had spent the morning working in our garden, cultivating a rare species of desert sage. Julian was a man rooted in the tangible world. He built physical spaces that endured the harsh climate. His entire existence stood in direct opposition to the hollow, synthetic reality my family fabricated. He saw the cream-colored paper resting on the kitchen island. He set his towel down and picked up the invitation. His eyes scanned the calligraphy, stopping on the restrictive condition at the bottom. The muscles in his jaw tightened. He looked at me, his gaze steady and protective. "You owe them nothing," he said, his voice a low, calm anchor. "They threw you out when you were a liability. Now they want to use you as a prop to secure a loan. You do not have to perform for them." He was right. Declining the invitation was the safest route. I could throw the heavy cardstock into the recycling bin and return to the peace we had built. But my corporate instincts flared. I realized that ignoring the summons would allow my father to control the narrative. If I did not attend, his public relations team would simply spin a different story for Sterling. They would whisper that I was unstable, estranged by my own choice, and too fragile to attend a family function. They would paint my absence as a tragedy they were bravely enduring. I could not allow them to maintain that fiction. "I am not going to perform for them," I told Julian. "I am going to RSVP, yes, but I will attend entirely on my own terms. I am going to control the board." Attending the gala required armor. My family communicated through visual wealth. They judged a person by the logos on their accessories and the seasonal relevance of their couture. If I arrived wearing something off the rack, they would immediately assume I was destitute, confirming their narrative that I had failed outside their influence. If I arrived wearing a flashy, recognizable designer, they would assume I had plunged myself into debt just to keep up appearances. I needed a garment that projected undeniable, untouchable power. I contacted a private bespoke tailor located in Los Angeles. I bypassed the local Scottsdale boutiques where my mother and sister-in-law gossiped with the staff. I provided the tailor with a single strict directive. I wanted a gown crafted from slate gray raw silk. It needed to be entirely unbranded, no logos, no ostentatious embellishments. The design had to rely purely on architectural precision and the staggering quality of the fabric. When the gown arrived, it was devastatingly expensive and wholly silent. True wealth whispers. The dress was a uniform engineered for corporate warfare. It was designed to unnerve them by offering zero information about my financial status, while simultaneously projecting an aura of cold, unassailable authority. The audio tension in our modest home built steadily as the date of the gala approached. While the tailors finalized the armor, I sat in my home office finalizing the ammunition. The night before the event, I arranged a stack of legal documents across my wooden desk. The contrast was stark and deeply satisfying. On the left side sat the heavy, cream-colored invitation requesting my polite compliance. On the right side sat a sterile, rigid stack of corporate foreclosure notices. My holding company had successfully purchased every secondary debt instrument tied to Williams Corporation. The process took weeks of careful maneuvering through blind trusts and venture capital proxies. Now the resulting paperwork laid bare the fatal errors of my father. I owned the mortgages on his primary logistics centers. I owned the revolving credit lines funding his executive payroll. I held the commercial paper to the Paradise Valley Golf Resort he loved more than his own family. Because his finance division had defaulted on several hidden covenants over the past fiscal quarter, I was legally authorized to call in the debts immediately. There was no grace period left to exploit. I reviewed the final transfer pages, noting the exact sum of his liabilities. The numbers were staggering. My father had built a house of cards and leveraged it against a hurricane. I picked up a black ink pen and signed my name on the execution orders. The strokes were firm and deliberate. I placed the signed documents into a sleek, dark leather folio. I was not going to utilize the Postal Service to deliver this message. I was not going to let a nameless corporate attorney serve the papers in a sterile boardroom. I was going to hand-deliver the total destruction of the Williams legacy in the very center of their own celebration. The memory faded as Victoria closed the remaining distance across the Vanguard ballroom. The clicking of her heels stopped. She arrived at table 72, breathing hard, her chest heaving under her designer gown. The sheer venom in her posture contrasted sharply with the elegant string quartet playing in the background. She thought she was ambushing a helpless, discarded relative. She believed she possessed the high ground. She had no idea the leather folio containing her financial ruin was resting safely in the hands of my general manager, waiting for my signal. I looked up at her, maintaining my grip on the crystal water goblet. The quiet, minimalist armor of my gray silk gown absorbed the harsh glare of the chandelier. I was ready. The collision had finally arrived. As Victoria stood over me, breathing heavily under the grand chandelier she believed she dictated the terms of this engagement, she thought her sudden descent from the head table was a spontaneous act of dominance. She had no idea she was merely walking the precise path I had laid out for her. To understand the profound depth of her miscalculation, we must pause this moment and rewind 5 days. We must return to the week of the gala, when the Vanguard Hotel closed its doors to the public to prepare for my family. 5 days ago, I sat in the shadowed quiet of my executive suite on the top floor of the hotel. The room was bathed in the cool blue light of a dozen high-definition security monitors. The screens displayed every angle of the grand ballroom below. The crystal prisms hung perfectly still. The imported parquet floors gleamed under the amber lighting. David stood beside my desk, holding a digital clipboard. My general manager was a man of impeccable posture and guarded expressions. Years ago, David served as a regional director for Williams Corporation. My father terminated his contract to scapegoat him for a logistical failure caused by my brother Harrison. My family stripped David of his pension and his reputation. I found him working at a mid-tier airport hotel. I handed him the keys to the Vanguard. His loyalty was forged in the same fire as mine. We both knew the true cost of working for Richard Williams. On the center monitor, the heavy brass doors of the ballroom swung open. Victoria stepped into the frame. She wore oversized designer sunglasses, despite the dim indoor lighting. She carried a leather planner like a weapon. 2 event coordinators flanked her, hovering with anxious deference. I tapped the audio feed button on my console. The microphones embedded in the ceiling array picked up the sharp rhythmic click of her heels. "This space is entirely too dark," Victoria snapped, stopping in the center of the room. "It feels like a tomb. I was promised an opulent venue, not a mausoleum. I want the ambient lighting increased by 40%, and these draperies are tragic." I leaned back in my leather chair, sipping my black coffee. The draperies, she insulted, were hand-woven silk, imported from Milan. I had selected them myself. The dramatic irony dripped from every syllable she uttered. She was standing in my building, critiquing my taste, operating under the delusion that her family wealth made her the sovereign ruler of the space. David excused himself from my suite and rode the service elevator down to the ballroom. I watched him approach her on the monitor. He offered a polite, measured bow. He was the picture of hospitality, masking a razor-sharp intellect. "Madam David," said, his voice projecting clearly through the speakers, "we can adjust the lighting array to your exact specifications. Our absentee owner prefers a more understated elegance, but we are here to serve your vision." Victoria scoffed, flipping open her leather planner. "Your absentee owner clearly lacks a refined aesthetic. Ensure the adjustments are made by tomorrow morning. Now, let us review the seating chart. My father-in-law requires the head table to be elevated. He must have a clear, unobstructed view of the entire room." She paced across the floor, pointing her manicured finger at various locations. David followed, noting every demand on his clipboard. She complained about the floral arrangements, calling them cheap. She criticized the acoustics, demanding the string quartet be moved to a corner where they would not interrupt the conversation of the key investors. Every demand was a masterclass in entitlement. Then she stopped near the swinging wooden doors of the catering kitchen. She looked down at her planner, tracing a line with her fingernail. "This is table 72, she noted. "Who is assigned to this location?" David did not need to check his screen. "That is reserved for Charlotte Williams, madam." A cruel, hollow smile spread across Victoria's face. The high-definition camera captured the exact moment her eyes lit up with vindictive pleasure. "Perfect," she murmured. "Leave it exactly there. In fact, ensure the catering staff uses this specific door for the entire evening service. I want her to feel every single draft. I want her to smell the dish soap." David looked directly up at the security camera hidden in the molding. He knew I was watching. "As you wish, madam," he replied. Victoria believed she was orchestrating a petty, flawless humiliation. She wanted to remind the exiled daughter of her place at the bottom of the hierarchy. She wanted me isolated near the service entrance, forced to watch the real power brokers dine in comfort. I tapped the intercom button on my console, connecting directly to David's earpiece. "Confirm her request?" I instructed, my voice low and steady. "Tell her we will optimize the service route to accommodate her preference." When Victoria finally left the building, satisfied with her cruel machinations, I initiated the second phase of the trap. I called a mandatory staff meeting in the underground briefing room. 75 employees filed into the space. Waiters, bartenders, security personnel, and the executive catering chefs. They wore crisp uniforms and stood in attentive silence. They were my people. They earned fair wages, received comprehensive health care, and worked in an environment free of the toxicity my family normalized. I stood at the front of the room holding a stack of non-disclosure agreements. Many of you know my history. I began projecting my voice across the rows of chairs. You know who rented the ballroom this weekend? You know they believe they own the ground they walk on? Tonight, every single person in this room will sign a strict confidentiality clause. You are forbidden from addressing me by my title during the event. You are forbidden from acknowledging my ownership to any guest. For the duration of the gala, I am simply the outcast at table 72. The catering manager, a fierce woman named Elena, stepped forward to collect the documents. Her eyes gleamed with quiet understanding. "How do you want the service handled?" she asked. "I want you to lean into their insult," I told her. "I want table 72 to be the coldest, most isolated seat in the building. Do not grease the hinges on the kitchen doors. I want them to squeak every time they swing open. I want the overhead air conditioning vent angled directly downward over my chair. I want the lighting above that specific table to cast a harsh, uncomplimentary shadow." A murmur of surprise rippled through the staff. Elena frowned slightly. "You want us to make you uncomfortable." "I want them to believe they have won," I clarified. "I want my father and my sister-in-law to look at that table and feel a profound sense of superiority. If they feel superior, they will drop their guard. They will focus all their energy on their performance for the investors. They must not suspect the floor is about to collapse beneath them." The staff nodded their confusion, shifting into a sharp, focused loyalty. They understood the assignment. They were not just serving a gala. They were participating in a surgical strike against a dying empire. For the next 4 days, I watched my team execute the preparations with flawless professionalism. The chefs crafted a menu that looked opulent, but utilized mid-tier ingredients, exposing my father's dwindling budget. The lighting technicians calibrated the amber glow to highlight the fake greenery in the centerpieces. The security detail mapped the exits and secured the service corridors. I managed every detail from the shadowed suite. I reviewed the final foreclosure documents, tracing my signature over the execution lines. The trap was primed. The bait was set. The structural integrity of the Williams legacy was compromised on every single level. Which brings us back to the present moment. Victoria stood over table 72, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with fury. The squeaking kitchen door swung shut behind her, casting a cold draft over my slate gray silk gown. She had walked across the ballroom to deliver the final blow to the disgraced sister-in-law. She leaned in, ready to unleash her venom, unaware that the entire room, the staff, the lighting, the very air conditioning blowing down on her neck, had been meticulously designed to maximize her impending destruction. I looked up at her and took a slow, deliberate breath. The stage was mine. The performance was over. Victoria leaned over the pristine linen of table 72. Her chest heaved under the tight bodice of her designer gown. Her eyes, wide and frantic, searched my face for a flicker of intimidation. She expected me to cower. She expected the sheer weight of her proximity to force my gaze downward, but her rage did not materialize out of thin air. It had been simmering, incubating, and compounding for 2 agonizing hours. The catalyst for her breakdown began the exact moment I arrived at the gala. Earlier that evening, an unassuming black town car glided to a halt in front of the Vanguard main entrance. I stepped out onto the polished concrete driveway. The warm, arid desert breeze swept past me, carrying the faint scent of blooming jasmine. The valet attendant, a young man named Carlos, who reported directly to my head of operations, stepped forward. He did not ask for a name. He offered a slight deferential nod, recognizing his employer. I handed him the keys and turned toward the towering glass doors. I crossed the threshold into the grand foyer. I had personally authorized every architectural element in this space. The imported Italian marble beneath my feet featured stark white veins designed to guide the eye toward the central chandelier. The acoustic paneling, hidden behind the crown molding, was engineered to trap ambient noise while carrying distinct voices. The sound design of the room became my greatest tactical advantage. As I walked into the crowded reception area, a collective holding of breath rippled through the corporate elite. The hushed, vicious whispers began immediately. I heard the sharp intake of air from the wives of banking executives. I heard the low, calculated murmurs of the board members. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes faltered. The exiled daughter had returned. I navigated the gauntlet, meeting the polite frost of my extended family. They stood in rigid, tight circles, clutching their drinks like shields. I saw my Uncle Robert, a senior board member at Williams Corporation. He averted his eyes when I passed. Robert was a man who blindly signed the authorization forms for the toxic short-term loans I had recently purchased. He stood there drinking premium scotch, oblivious to the fact that I owned the mortgage on his winter estate. Then, my Aunt Clara intercepted my path. Clara was a woman who treated social standing as a blood sport. She wore a suffocating emerald dress that restricted her breathing. She clutched a glass of sparkling wine and offered a mask of faux sympathy. "Charlotte," she cooed, her voice carrying over the music. "What a surprise! We all assumed you lacked the courage to show your face. Tell me, is Julian still digging in the dirt? It must be so exhausting living hand to mouth in this economy." I did not flinch. I did not offer a defensive justification. I parried her insult with a lethal, polite precision. "Julian is thriving, Clara," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly level. "We find that cultivating assets from the ground up provides a much stronger foundation than relying on inherited paper. I hear your husband's real estate portfolio took a severe downturn last quarter. I hope you are weathering the losses." Clara choked on her wine. The false pity vanished from her eyes, replaced by a flash of genuine shock. She had no idea how I knew about her private financial struggles. The surrounding guests overheard the exchange. Victoria, standing near the cloakroom, witnessed the entire interaction. She saw me dismantle a senior family member with a single calm sentence. The seed of her current fury was planted in that precise moment. I left Clara standing in stunned silence and proceeded to the main ballroom. I took my assigned seat by the swinging wooden doors of the catering kitchen. I sat perfectly straight, my posture impeccable. I sipped my sparkling water and watched my family strut around my property. The listener must understand the intoxicating nature of this dramatic irony. Every sneer directed at me, every condescending glance, every thinly veiled insult they hurled was an insult to their own landlord. They were mocking the woman who held their financial survival in a dark leather folio. They treated the Vanguard staff like indentured servants, unaware that those employees reported to the outcast sitting at table 72. The psychological tension boiled, bubbling just beneath the surface of the elegant gala. As I sat by the kitchen doors, I thought of Julian. Julian taught me how to read the physical space. He taught me that true structural integrity lies beneath the surface. My family built their empire on drywall and hollow beams. They decorated it with imported silk to hide the rot. Julian and I built our foundation on solid bedrock. We weathered the desert storms because we understood resilience. Sitting there, listening to the clinking crystal, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. I was insulated from their toxicity. Thomas the waiter passed by my table 3 times. Each time he offered a subtle shift in his posture, a silent pledge of allegiance. The staff knew the battle lines were drawn. They moved through the room with flawless professionalism, executing their duties while watching the impending collision out of the corners of their eyes. The pressure cooker reached its limit during my father's speech. When he demanded I stand and offer my submission, I remained anchored to my chair. My refusal to participate in his public relations theater shattered their curated illusion. It exposed the fracture in the Williams dynasty to the one investor they desperately needed to impress. That singular act of defiance propelled Victoria across the parquet floor. Now she stood over me, the heat of her anger radiating across the table. The squeaking hinge of the kitchen door groaned behind her as a server passed, carrying a tray of empty plates. A gust of cold air carrying the faint odor of industrial dish soap washed over us. Victoria wrinkled her nose in disgust. She despised the sensory realities of the service industry. "This venue is invite only," she hissed. Her voice was a frantic, scraped whisper meant to convey absolute authority. "You are a disgrace who married poor, and you are trespassing. I looked at her manicured hands gripping the edge of the table. Her knuckles were white. The diamond bracelet trembled against her wrist. She was projecting strength, but her physical tells revealed a woman spiraling into panic. I set my crystal goblet down on the linen cloth. The condensation left a small dark ring on the fabric. "I am not trespassing, Victoria," I said, my voice smooth and unbothered. "I am simply auditing the event." Her jaw tightened. "You are nothing," she spat. "You are a failed experiment. Your father is going to ruin whatever pathetic life you managed to scrape together in the dirt." Before I could deliver the final blow, a new shadow fell across the table. My father arrived. He had abandoned his position at the podium, leaving the billionaire investor sitting alone. Richard Williams marched toward us, his face flushed, a dark, dangerous shade of crimson. The synthetic warmth he displayed during his speech was entirely gone. He looked like a cornered predator. Behind him, 2 security guards in dark suits moved in tandem, closing the distance. They reached for their earpieces, their expressions grim and focused. The stakes escalated instantly. The psychological warfare was transforming into a physical eviction. "Why is this beggar here?" my father snapped. His voice cut through the ambient noise of the room. He did not care who heard him. The facade of the benevolent patriarch had burned to the ground. "Escort her out, now." The guards stepped forward, forming a wall between me and the rest of the ballroom. The trap was closing. The final conflict of the night was here. The 2 security guards closed the final gap. Their dark suits shifted as they raised their hands, reaching out to grip my shoulders. I felt the displacement of air as they moved. The entire ballroom held its collective breath. 300 members of the Scottsdale corporate elite watched in rapt silence, expecting to see the exiled daughter dragged across the imported marble. My father stood behind the guards, his chest inflated with the hollow triumph of a man who believed he still controlled the board. I did not flinch. I did not shrink back into my chair. I simply raised my left wrist and checked the vintage silver watch clasped against my skin. It was exactly 9 o'clock. Before the guards could make physical contact, a figure stepped out from the shadowed archway of the catering kitchen. David, my general manager, moved with a calm, undeniable authority. He bypassed Victoria, who was still hovering near the table. He ignored my father. He stepped directly between the advancing security personnel and my chair. David did not raise his hands. He did not adopt a defensive posture. He simply stood there, a seasoned professional, reclaiming the dignity my family had stolen from him years ago. When my father used David as a scapegoat to cover for a logistical failure he assumed, David would fade into obscurity. He assumed collateral damage had no memory. "Stand down," David commanded. His voice was not a shout, it was a resonant, booming baritone that cut through the ambient noise of the ballroom like a steel blade. The acoustics of the space carried his words to the farthest corners of the room. The guards froze. They were contracted through a local security firm, but their site protocol mandated they follow the directives of the hotel general manager. They looked at David, then glanced back at my father, their training conflicting with the unfolding reality. My father, face contorted into a mask of pure indignation. "Are you out of your mind, Richard?" demanded, taking a step toward David. "I rented this entire facility. I am your client. Have this beggar removed from the premises immediately, or I will see to it that you never work in this industry again." David did not blink. He squared his shoulders and delivered the final blow to the Williams family mythology. "How dare you," David said, projecting his voice so every investor, politician, and rival executive could hear the truth. "You will not lay a hand on her. This woman owns the Vanguard. She owns the land you parked your cars on, and she owns the holding company currently underwriting your corporate debt." The silence that followed was absolute. The string quartet in the corner had stopped playing moments ago. The clinking of crystal ceased. The ambient hum of the air conditioning system seemed to amplify in the quiet. I placed my hands on the edge of the table and stood up. The slate-gray raw silk of my gown caught the amber light of the chandelier. I smoothed the fabric in unhurried, deliberate motion that drew every eye in the room. The physical elevation shifted the dynamic. I was no longer looking up at them. I was standing on my own ground. I met my father's gaze. The arrogant fire in his eyes flickered and died, replaced by a sudden, chilling comprehension. "You have no idea whose building you are standing in, do you?" I asked, my voice smooth and measured. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin the color of old parchment. His jaw worked, but no sound emerged. Decades of ruthless corporate dominance, decades of crushing smaller competitors under the weight of his checkbook evaporated in a single second. He looked around the grand ballroom, taking in the hand-woven draperies, the Italian marble, the crisp uniforms of the staff. He was processing the staggering reality that the daughter he threw away had built the cage he was currently standing inside. Victoria took a staggering, unsteady step backward. Her designer heels caught on the edge of a floor grate, causing her to stumble. She gripped the back of an empty chair to steady herself. Her pageant queen composure disintegrated. Her chest heaved as she stared at me, her eyes wide with a terrifying realization. The woman she had just called a disgrace, who married poor, was her landlord. Every complaint she lodged about the absentee owner, every insult she hurled at the staff, was a direct strike against the person holding her financial survival in her hands. My father tried to salvage the wreckage. His survival instinct kicked in, overriding his shock. He forced a harsh, abrasive laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "This is a pathetic stunt," Richard announced, turning his back to me and addressing the surrounding tables. "This is an elaborate fabrication. My daughter is destitute. She is attempting to extort me to save her own miserable circumstances. Security, arrest this man for trespassing and remove them both." He pointed a shaking finger at David. No one moved. The security guards took a synchronized step backward, lowering their hands. They recognized who signed their paychecks. The catering staff standing near the perimeter of the room remained perfectly still, their loyalty cemented to the woman who paid them fair wages and treated them with respect. My father was a king, commanding an army that no longer recognized his authority. The isolation hit him like a physical blow. He looked at the guards, he looked at the waiters, he looked at the event coordinators. They all stared back with blank, unyielding professionalism. He was entirely alone. At the head table, the conservative billionaire investor named Sterling shifted in his chair. Sterling was a man who calculated risk for a living. He possessed a shark-like instinct for weakness. He watched the scene unfold with cold, detached interest. He saw the patriarch of the Williams dynasty, stripped of his power, unable to command a single employee in a rented ballroom. The illusion of family unity was shattered. I did not let the silence drag. The theater of the reveal was over. It was time for the execution. I turned to David and offered a single, concise nod. David reached into his jacket and retrieved a small digital radio. "Execute the distribution," he instructed, speaking into the microphone. The swinging wooden doors of the catering kitchen opened. Elena, the catering manager, stepped out, followed by 6 senior servers. They did not carry trays of hors d'oeuvres or silver pitchers of water. They carried sleek, dark leather folios. They bypassed table 72 and marched in a synchronized line directly toward the elevated head table. My father watched them approach, his confusion mounting. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice losing its abrasive edge. "What are you doing?" The servers reached the head table. They placed one leather folio in front of Sterling. They placed the remaining folios in front of the key board members and primary investors my father had spent months courting. The synchronized thud of the heavy leather hitting the linen tablecloths echoed across the room. Elena stepped back and folded her hands behind her back. "For your review, gentlemen," she said. Sterling did not hesitate. He unclasped the folio and opened the cover. He retrieved a pair of reading glasses from his breast pocket and slid them onto his face. His eyes scanned the top page. The document was not a menu. It was a certified copy of the secondary debt acquisition. It detailed the exact transfer of the Williams Corporation commercial mortgages, the revolving credit lines, and the toxic short-term loans. It bore the official seal of the State Financial Regulatory Commission. The bottom of the page clearly identified my anonymous holding company as the primary creditor. Sterling flipped to the second page. This document was far more damaging. It was the foreclosure notice. It outlined the hidden covenants my father had breached over the past fiscal quarter. It proved that Williams Corporation was not just struggling, it was legally bankrupt. I watched Sterling read the numbers. The deep lines around his mouth tightened. He looked up from the paper and stared directly at my father. The expression on his face was one of profound clinical disgust. Sterling realized he had been invited to a party funded by a corpse. Richard Sterling said, his voice raspy and cold. "You assured me your core real estate assets were unencumbered. You provided my analysts with ledgers indicating a 20% growth margin." My father scrambled back toward the head table, his panic overriding his pride. "Sterling, I can explain," he stammered, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "Those numbers are temporary. We are undergoing a minor restructuring phase. This is a targeted smear campaign orchestrated by a disgruntled former employee." Sterling dropped the papers back into the folio and closed the cover. The sound was definitive. "A smear campaign implies falsehood, Richard. These are certified regulatory transfers. Your daughter does not just own this hotel, she owns your entire logistics network. She owns your corporate headquarters. You are insolvent." The word hung in the air. Insolvent. In the cutthroat world of corporate finance, there is no greater sin than projecting false wealth to secure a loan. It is a terminal offense. The surrounding executives heard the diagnosis. The remaining board members opened their folios and read the proof. The room erupted into a chaotic symphony of whispered panic and shifting alliances. They were scrambling to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout. My father stood frozen at the base of the head table. The empire he spent 4 decades building, the legacy he valued above his own bloodline, was dissolving into ash. He turned slowly and looked across the room at me. The final conflict of the night was no longer about survival. It was about the desperate transactional pivot a dying man makes when he has nothing left to sell. The grand ballroom of the Vanguard Hotel descended into a fragile, breathless quiet. My father stood at the wooden podium, his knuckles white, his demand hanging in the chilled air. He had ordered me to stand. He required a public display of submission to secure his private equity bailout. When I remained anchored to my chair, sipping my sparkling water, the curated illusion of the Williams family dynasty cracked. That silent refusal was the spark that ignited the final collision. At the elevated head table, Victoria could no longer maintain her pageant queen composure. She recognized the mortal danger my defiance posed to her social standing. If the conservative investor Sterling witnessed this rebellion, the funding would vanish. Her chair scraped hard against the elevated platform. She stood up, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the amber light of the chandelier. She bypassed the security detail and descended the short staircase, her designer heels striking the imported parquet floor with a frantic, escalating rhythm. The corporate elite parted like water, allowing her to pass. They sensed the impending wreckage. I watched her approach from my assigned seat at table 72. The location she chose for me, near the swinging wooden doors of the catering kitchen, was designed to be a quarantine zone. It was meant to isolate me. Instead, it provided the perfect vantage point to observe her unraveling. Victoria arrived at my table breathing heavily. Her chest heaved under the tight bodice of her emerald gown. The muscles in her neck were corded tight with suppressed panic. She leaned over the crisp white linen, placing both of her manicured hands flat against the table. She wanted to use her physical proximity to force my gaze downward. She expected the sheer weight of her anger to intimidate me into compliance. I did not look away. I held her furious stare, feeling the cold draft from the service corridor wash over my shoulders. "This venue is invite only," she hissed. Her voice was a scraped, desperate whisper, engineered to convey total authority. "It is reserved for those who respect this family. You are a disgrace who married poor, and you are trespassing." She poured every ounce of her venom into those sentences. She truly believed her words possessed the power to wound me. She operated under the delusion that I still valued the currency of her approval. I set my crystal goblet down. The condensation left a small, dark circle on the tablecloth. I did not offer a defensive justification. I did not raise my voice to match her frantic energy. My sheer lack of a reaction seemed to siphon the oxygen directly from her lungs. Her eyes widened, searching my face for a flicker of fear, and finding nothing but cold, impenetrable granite. Before she could launch another verbal strike, a new shadow fell across our table. My father had abandoned his position at the podium. He realized his public relations masterpiece was spiraling into a catastrophe. He marched across the ballroom, his face flushed a dark, dangerous shade of crimson. The synthetic warmth he displayed during his speech had evaporated. He looked like a cornered predator, stripped of his strategic advantages. He did not arrive alone. 2 security guards in dark suits followed closely behind him. They moved in tandem, their expressions grim and focused. "Why is this beggar here?" my father snapped. He did not bother to lower his volume. The harsh syllables echoed across the silent room, reaching the ears of the banking executives and local politicians. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "Escort her out, now!" The security guards stepped forward, forming a dark wall between my table and the rest of the guests. They reached for their earpieces, preparing to initiate a physical eviction. The psychological warfare had transformed into a tangible threat. The trap was closing. I smoothed the immaculate slate gray silk of my gown. I glanced at the vintage silver watch circling my left wrist. The timing was flawless. Before the guards could make contact, the heavy wooden doors of the catering kitchen swung open. David, my general manager, stepped out from the shadows. All week, Victoria had treated David like an indentured servant. She barked orders at him regarding the floral arrangements. She complained to him about the ambient lighting. She strutted through his hotel, operating under the assumption that her family wealth granted her supreme jurisdiction over his staff. She expected him to grovel. David did not grovel. He wore a midnight blue suit and moved with the calm, undeniable grace of a seasoned professional. He bypassed Victoria entirely, ignoring her outstretched hand. He did not look at my father. He stepped directly between the advancing security personnel and my chair, establishing a firm protective perimeter. David did not adopt a defensive posture. He reclaimed the dignity my family stole from him years ago. "How dare you," David commanded. His voice was a resonant, booming baritone that cut through the ambient noise like a steel blade. The architectural acoustics of the ballroom amplified his words, sending them crashing over the stunned crowd. The security guards froze. Their site protocol mandated they follow the directives of the hotel management. They looked at David, then glanced back at my father, their training conflicting with the sudden shift in reality. My father opened his mouth to object, but David delivered the killing blow to the Williams family mythology. "This woman owns the Vanguard," David announced, projecting his voice so every investor in the room could hear the truth. "She owns the land you parked your cars on, and she owns the holding company currently underwriting your corporate debt." The silence that descended upon the ballroom was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet. The string quartet had stopped playing. The clinking of silverware ceased. 300 members of the Scottsdale elite stopped breathing. The power dynamic inverted with such velocity it caused a visceral emotional whiplash. I placed my hands on the edge of the table and stood up. The physical elevation shifted the geometry of the confrontation. I was no longer looking up at them. I was standing on my own ground, insulated by a foundation I built from the dirt. The contrast between my quiet, unbranded silk gown and Victoria gaudy diamond jewelry was stark. True wealth does not need to shout. I met my father's gaze. The arrogant fire burning in his eyes flickered and died. It was replaced by a sudden, chilling comprehension. "You have no idea whose building you are standing in, do you?" I asked, my voice smooth and measured. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin the color of old parchment. His jaw worked, but no sound emerged. Decades of ruthless corporate dominance, decades of crushing smaller competitors under the weight of his checkbook, vanished in a single heartbeat. He looked around the grand ballroom, taking in the hand-woven draperies, the Italian marble, the crisp uniforms of the catering staff. He was processing the staggering reality that the daughter he threw away had meticulously constructed the cage he currently occupied. Victoria took a staggering, unsteady step backward. Her designer heels caught on the edge of a floor grate, causing her to stumble. She gripped the back of an empty chair to maintain her balance. Her pageant queen composure shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Her chest heaved as she stared at me, her eyes wide with a terrifying realization. The woman she just called a disgrace was her landlord. Every complaint she lodged about the absentee owner, every insult she hurled at the staff, was a direct strike against the person holding her financial survival in her hands. The emotional whiplash paralyzed her. She opened her mouth to speak, but her vocal cords refused to function. The loop was perfectly closed. 8 years ago, my father sat in a freezing mahogany office and told me I owned nothing. He erased my accounts and declared me a stranger. He believed removing my foundation would bury me. He failed to realize he merely taught me how to dig. Now he stood shivering in the center of his own anniversary gala, stripped of his power, unable to command a single employee in a rented ballroom. The theater of the reveal was complete. The audience was captivated, but the execution was just beginning. The silent, invisible empire I built in the desert was about to swallow the Williams legacy whole. The quiet in the grand ballroom felt heavy enough to shatter the crystal centerpieces. My father stood paralyzed at the edge of table 72. The color had abandoned his face, leaving behind a pallid gray mask of shock. The initial revelation regarding the ownership of the Vanguard Hotel had struck him with the force of a physical blow. But the human mind possesses a stubborn survival instinct. When confronted with total destruction, ego often manufactures a temporary delusion. Richard Williams gripped the back of an empty chair, his knuckles strained against the dark wood. He forced a laugh. The sound emerged hollow and grating, echoing poorly across the vast space. "This is a stunt," he declared, turning his attention away from me and addressing the surrounding guests. "It is a pathetic, theatrical stunt. She printed fake documents to cause a scene. Do not insult our intelligence, Charlotte. You do not possess the capital to buy a coffee shop, let alone a commercial hospitality venue." He looked toward the head table, seeking validation from the corporate elite. He desperately needed them to believe his narrative. He needed Sterling, the conservative billionaire, whose bailout funds represented his final lifeline, to view me as a delusional outcast. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to scream to be heard. The ambient acoustics of the room worked in my favor, carrying my words to every corner. I signaled David with a subtle shift of my gaze. My general manager understood the cue. He reached into his suit jacket and retrieved a digital tablet. He tapped a single command on the screen. The presentation monitors mounted along the perimeter of the ballroom suddenly flared to life. The screens had been dark all evening, presumed to be decorative architectural features. Now they displayed crisp, high-definition images of certified banking ledgers. The documents were magnified, rendering the financial data visible to every executive, politician, and rival developer in the venue. "Those are not fake documents, Richard," I stated, my tone clinical and detached. "They are certified regulatory filings, executed and filed 48 hours ago." I stepped away from the table, leaving Victoria trembling near the swinging kitchen doors. I walked toward the center of the room, commanding the floor. The guests parted instinctively, giving me a wide berth. They recognized a shift in the apex hierarchy. "Let us review the exact figures," I continued, projecting my voice toward the head table. "I want your potential investors to understand the precise nature of the asset they are considering." I pointed to the nearest digital monitor. The screen displayed a complex web of corporate loans. 3 months ago, Williams Corporation secured a $150 million short-term credit line from a private equity consortium, I recited, pulling the numbers from memory. You leveraged your primary logistics centers across the Southwest to secure that capital. The loan carried a strict liquidity covenant, requiring you to maintain $40 million in cash reserves. My father opened his mouth to interrupt, but the facts choked him. He knew the numbers were accurate. 2 weeks ago, I said, pacing a slow, deliberate line across the parquet floor, you breached that covenant. Your cash reserves dropped below $12 million. You attempted to hide the deficit by routing funds through a subsidiary shell company attached to your Paradise Valley golf resort. It was a desperate accounting trick. It was also a fatal error. At the head table, Sterling adjusted his reading glasses. He picked up the leather folio my staff had distributed earlier and cross-referenced the paper documents with the data displayed on the monitors. His silver eyebrows drew together, forming a tight line of severe disapproval. Sterling was a predator who respected ruthless efficiency. He despised sloppy financial maneuvering. "When you breached the covenant, you triggered a default clause," I explained, my voice steady and unyielding. The consortium placed your debt on the secondary market. You assumed a standard vulture fund would acquire the notes, giving you time to negotiate a restructuring plan. You were incorrect. I stopped walking and turned to face my father. My shadow holding company purchased every single note I told him. We acquired the logistics center mortgages. We bought the revolving credit lines funding your executive payroll. We hold the commercial paper to the Paradise Valley Resort. We bought it all for pennies on the dollar because the market recognizes a dying entity when it sees one. The audience of cutthroat business elites immediately read the room. They were masters of reading corporate vulnerabilities. They looked at the certified ledgers on the screens. They looked at the documents in their folios. The realization washed over the crowd, sweeping away any remaining doubt. They were attending a lavish anniversary gala funded by a dead empire. The caviar, the champagne, the imported floral arrangements were all paid for with borrowed money from a bankrupt treasury. The entire evening was a fraudulent display of prosperity. My father stood frozen in the center of his shattered illusion. The carefully constructed facade of the Williams dynasty crumbled in real time. Decades of aggressive acquisitions, decades of projecting untouchable superiority, dissolved into a humiliating public spectacle. Sterling closed his leather folio. The heavy thud of the cover hitting the table finalized the verdict. "You lied to my firm," Richard Sterling said. His voice lacked any trace of the polite camaraderie they had shared an hour ago. It was the cold, sterile tone of a banker terminating an unprofitable relationship. "You presented falsified revenue projections. You claimed your core assets were unencumbered." Sterling stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket, signaling the end of the negotiation. "We are done here," Sterling announced. "My firm does not inject capital into insolvent vanity projects. Furthermore, I will ensure every managing partner in my network is made aware of these fraudulent practices." The words were a death sentence. Sterling was not merely declining the investment, he was blacklisting Williams Corporation across the highest echelons of private equity. He was sealing off every potential exit route. My father scrambled toward the head table, his pride replaced by naked terror. "Sterling, wait," he pleaded, extending his hands. "We can salvage this. The market fluctuations were unforeseen. If you give me 30 days, I can liquidate the secondary holdings and balance the ledgers." Sterling did not pause. He did not offer a response. He walked away from the table, signaling his security detail to clear a path toward the exit. The departure of the primary investor triggered a chain reaction. The remaining board members and local politicians recognized the shifting tides. Loyalty in their world was tethered exclusively to profitability. Once the profit vanished, the loyalty evaporated. They began quietly gathering their belongings, abandoning their drinks, and heading toward the coat check. No one wanted to be photographed attending a sinking ship. I stood in the center of the thinning crowd. I had not just ruined their party, I had legally and publicly severed their financial lifelines in front of the only people who possessed the capital to save them. The execution was flawless. Victoria remained near the kitchen doors. Her emerald gown seemed to swallow her. The social throne she worshipped, the elite status she wielded like a weapon against Julian and me, was gone. She was staring at a future devoid of the unearned privilege she felt entitled to. She looked at her diamond tennis bracelet as if the gems might suddenly turn to glass. My father turned back to face me. The panic in his eyes was visceral. He was a man drowning in an ocean of his own creations, searching for a piece of driftwood. He realized the market would not save him. His political allies had fled the building. The only person holding a lifeline was the daughter he had exiled to the desert 8 years ago. The Cold War was over. The financial dismantling was complete, but the human element of the tragedy remained unresolved. My father backed into a corner, with no remaining leverage, was about to attempt the most desperate and revealing maneuver of his entire existence. He was preparing to pivot. The grand ballroom began to empty with the swift, silent efficiency of a sinking ship. The corporate elite of Scottsdale possessed a finely tuned radar for financial contagion. They did not linger to offer condolences. They did not stop to say goodbye. The rustle of expensive gowns and the rapid clicking of polished leather shoes formed a chaotic, steady rhythm toward the exits. The coat check queue swelled into a frantic, pressing crowd. Within minutes, the carefully curated guest list evaporated, leaving behind tables littered with half-empty champagne flutes and untouched prime rib. My father stood amidst the wreckage of his own anniversary gala. The space around him expanded, making him look smaller, fragile, and profoundly isolated. His primary investor had vanished. His board members had scattered. The men who spent decades drinking his premium scotch and nodding at his executive decisions abandoned him the second his checkbook ran dry. I remained standing near the kitchen doors, watching the isolation settle over him. I anticipated a final outburst. I expected him to summon the police or hurl a barrage of bitter, venomous threats. Instead, Richard Williams executed a maneuver that chilled me to the bone. He engaged the only survival mechanism he truly understood. He initiated a transactional pivot. I watched him smooth the lapels of his tuxedo. He ran a hand over his silver hair, restoring a fraction of his curated posture. He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. The raw panic receded from his eyes, replaced by a cold, calculating light. He looked at me, not as a defiant daughter who just destroyed his legacy, but as an adversary who had successfully executed a hostile takeover. In his twisted architecture of reality, brute force and financial lethality were the highest virtues. He stepped forward, navigating around the abandoned chairs. He stopped 10 feet away from me. He cleared his throat. "Well played, Charlotte," he said. His tone was eerily calm, stripped of the abrasive fury he wielded moments ago. I did not respond. I let the silence hang suspended in the cool air conditioning of the ballroom. "You proved your point," my father continued, offering a stiff, practiced smile. "You orchestrated a brilliant maneuver. The diversionary tactics, the blind trusts, the localized data leak, it was a flawless campaign. I underestimated your business acumen. I assumed your departure would soften you. I see now that the harsh environment honed your instincts. You did not break, you adapted." He took another step closer, extending his hands in a gesture of open negotiation. "You possess the Williams blood," he declared, his voice echoing slightly in the hollow room. "You possess the ruthless drive required to manage a portfolio of this magnitude. You outmaneuvered my entire legal division. You secured the leverage. You have finally earned your place at the head of the table." He paused, letting the word linger in the air. "Earned." "I want to offer you a full partnership," he proposed. "We can consolidate our assets. You hold the secondary debt and the liquid capital. I hold the municipal connections, the zoning leverage, and 4 decades of localized brand equity. If we merge your holding company with my remaining infrastructure, we can dominate the southwestern hospitality sector. We can frame tonight as a strategic internal restructuring." Sterling walked away, but with our combined resources, we will not need his private equity. We can keep the empire in the family. I looked at the man standing before me. For 22 years, I operated under the suffocating weight of his expectations. I spent my entire youth modifying my behavior, editing my personality, and suppressing my own desires just to secure a fraction of his conditional approval. A younger version of myself might have wept at this offer. A younger Charlotte might have felt a surge of euphoric validation, hearing her father finally declare her worthy of the family name. The woman standing in the raw silk gown felt nothing but profound sorrowful pity. He truly believed this was a negotiation. He truly believed he possessed a currency I desired. He viewed my 8-year exile, the blistered hands, the early mornings hauling drywall, and the grueling ascent from the dirt as an extended corporate training program. He thought I built an entire life just to prove I was capable of sitting next to him. "You think this is a merger?" I asked, my voice soft, carrying a quiet, steady finality. "It is the logical progression," my father replied, maintaining his synthetic smile. "You won the war, Charlotte. To the victor go the spoils. Take your seat." I reached down and unclasped the small evening clutch resting on the table beside me. The smooth satin fabric parted. I did not pull out a legal contract. I did not retrieve a pen to sign a consolidation agreement. I reached inside and withdrew a small circular object. I held it up under the warm amber glow of the chandelier. It was a cheap plastic compass. The clear casing was scratched from years of sitting in my pocket. The tiny magnetic needle trembled slightly before pointing north. Julian bought it for me at a roadside gas station on our first anniversary. It cost less than $5. It was the only item I carried with me the day I walked out of the freezing mahogany office, and it remained the most valuable asset I owned. "Do you remember this?" I asked, holding the compass steady. My father frowned. His eyes darted to the plastic toy, unable to comprehend its relevance to a billion-dollar merger. "You told me that if I walked out the door, I would be liquidated," I reminded him. "You told me that out there I owned nothing, and that a relationship built without a financial foundation would collapse. You ordered me to marry a banking heir because you viewed love as a strategic acquisition." I lowered the compass, resting it in the palm of my hand. Julian gave me this compass when we had $42 in our checking account, I said. We slept on a deflated air mattress. We ate canned beans. We built a desert property with our bare hands while your lawyers tried to steal the ground beneath us. During every single agonizing day of that struggle, Julian never asked me for a return on his investment. He never graded my worth. He never placed conditions on his loyalty. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. Love and loyalty are not billed by the hour, I stated, keeping my gaze locked onto his eyes. They are not leveraged against short-term loans. They are not corporate assets you can buy on the secondary market when your original plan fails. My father dropped his hands. The practiced smile faded. The realization began to dawn on him that the currency he was offering held zero value in my economy. I do not want a partnership, I told him, the words ringing with absolute clarity. I do not want to consolidate our resources. I do not want your municipal connections or your hollow brand equity, and I certainly do not want a seat at your table. I looked past him toward the empty chairs, the discarded linen napkins, and the remnants of the fraudulent feast. Your table is bankrupt, I declared. It is bankrupt legally, it is bankrupt financially, and it is bankrupt morally. The ideology that governed this family, the belief that every human connection is a transaction to be exploited, is a toxic rot. I spent 8 years carving that poison out of my veins. I did not buy your debt to force a reconciliation. I bought your debt to ensure you could never leverage another human being again. I slipped the plastic compass back into my clutch and snapped it shut. The sharp click echoed with a crisp, concluding finality. The offer is rejected, Richard, I said, using his given name for the very first time. I am calling in the loans, the foreclosure proceeds at dawn. My father stood motionless. The breath rattled in his chest. The transactional pivot had failed. He possessed no remaining maneuvers. He possessed no remaining leverage. He was an emperor standing naked in the center of his ruined kingdom, staring at the architect of his demise. The confrontation was settled. The only task remaining was to clear the debris from the floor. I did not wait for my father to formulate a rebuttal. The finality of my rejection hung in the chilled air of the ballroom. I turned my back to the ruined patriarch and looked toward the perimeter of the room. David stood near the main archway, his posture impeccable. I caught his eye and delivered a single, sharp nod. David lifted his radio to his collar. "Terminate the ambient audio," he instructed, his voice carrying a sterile administrative calm. "Engage the maintenance lighting array." The faint instrumental track playing softly over the hidden speakers severed instantly. A heavy mechanical clunk echoed from the engineering corridors deep within the hotel infrastructure. The warm, golden glow of the crystal chandeliers faded into darkness. A fraction of a second later, the industrial fluorescent work lights embedded in the vaulted ceiling flared to life. The transition was stark and brutal. The curated glamour of the anniversary gala evaporated under the unforgiving glare of the cleaning cycle illumination. The magic of the venue stripped away, revealing the raw mechanics of a commercial space. The imported linen tablecloths looked pale. The scuff marks on the parquet floor stood out in sharp relief. The synthetic greenery hidden inside Victoria floral arrangements became painfully obvious, mimicking the artificial nature of their entire existence. I turned back to Richard and Victoria. My brother Harrison had materialized from the shadows near the bar. Harrison possessed none of the predatory instinct our father wielded. He looked pale, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned, staring at the digital monitors with vacant, terrified eyes. The remaining stragglers, a few low-level executives who had lingered near the exits, took one look at the harsh lighting and scrambled out the doors, eager to escape the radioactive fallout of the Williams name. "I am no longer speaking to you as a relative," I stated, keeping my tone devoid of any lingering emotion. "I am speaking to you as the property owner. Your event is canceled. Your reservation is terminated. You are trespassing on my real estate. Vacate the premises immediately." I did not raise my voice to shout an eviction. I delivered the order with the cold, bureaucratic efficiency of a landlord removing a delinquent tenant. The sterile delivery inflicted more damage than any scream could ever achieve. My father did not attempt another negotiation. He possessed a shrewd analytical mind, and the fluorescent lights illuminated the undeniable truth of his checkmate. He buttoned his jacket, a feeble attempt to gather fragments of his shattered dignity. He did not look at me again. He turned and began the long walk toward the grand double doors. Harrison followed him, trailing behind like a ghost. Victoria remained rooted to the floor for a few seconds longer. She stared at the empty catering tables, her emerald gown looking garish and out of place under the harsh bulbs. The social throne she worshipped lay in ruins. She gathered the fabric of her skirt and turned her back to table 72. I stood in the center of the room and watched them navigate the long exit. They walked out through the very foyer they tried to banish me from. They passed the Italian marble columns and the hand-woven draperies. My staff lined the perimeter of the reception area. The waiters, the security personnel, the coat check attendants stood in silent rows, offering no assistance. They merely watched the architects of a fallen dynasty march toward the glass doors. The silence of the employees formed a deafening gauntlet. The heavy brass doors swung shut, sealing their departure. The Williams legacy exited the building. The poetic justice of their collapse did not occur overnight, but the gears of their financial ruin ground forward with merciless speed. The epilogue of their empire played out in the sterile courtrooms of downtown Phoenix. At dawn the following morning, my legal team filed the executed foreclosure documents with the State Regulatory Commission. The secondary debt acquisition triggered immediate asset seizures. We did not offer grace periods. We did not negotiate restructuring plans. The banks acting on my authorized directives froze every remaining account tied to Williams Corporation. Within 14 days, the corporate logistics centers were shuttered and rebranded under my holding company portfolio. The Paradise Valley Golf Resort changed ownership, transferring the sprawling acreage into a sustainable water conservation trust. The most severe blow landed a month later when the municipal marshals arrived at the gated entrance of their Scottsdale estate. The primary mansion was heavily leveraged, serving as collateral for the short-term loans my father utilized to fund his payroll. When the debt defaulted, the estate forfeited. Richard, Victoria, and Harrison were forced to pack their personal belongings into rented moving trucks. They lost the manicured lawns, the climate-controlled wine cellars, and the chauffeured town cars. Stripped of their capital and blacklisted by the private equity sector, they possessed zero upward mobility. They had to seek housing within their new, agonizingly restrictive budget. They signed a lease on a cramped ground-floor unit in a cinder-block apartment complex located in the industrial district of Central Phoenix. It was the exact same low-rent complex where Julian and I lived during the first grueling year of my exile. I drove past the address once, sitting in the back of my town car behind tinted glass. I watched the rusted window air conditioning units dripping water onto the cracked concrete sidewalks. I saw the peeling paint on the doors. My family was now forced to navigate the blistering Arizona heat without the insulation of their wealth. They were living inside the precise reality they tried to use as a weapon against me. The symmetry of their fall offered a profound, quiet satisfaction. They were finally learning the true cost of equity. But the most vital victory did not belong to the balance sheets or the foreclosure notices. The true triumph lived in the quiet aftermath of the Vanguard Ballroom. Let us return to the night of the gala. After the glass doors shut behind my family, I remained in the empty ballroom. The catering staff quietly, efficiently began clearing the discarded crystal goblets and the untouched plates of food. I sat back down at table 72. I smoothed the slate gray silk of my gown, feeling the residual adrenaline slowly drain from my muscles. The war was over. The phantom weight of my father's judgment evaporated, lifting a crushing burden from my chest. The squeaking wooden hinge of the kitchen door groaned one final time. I turned my head. Julian walked out of the service corridor. He wore his tailored charcoal suit, but he carried two simple disposable paper cups filled with dark roast coffee. He had bypassed the grand foyer, entering through the delivery loading dock, because he knew the staff and respected the mechanics of the building. He walked over to table 72 and set a paper cup down in front of me. The rich, earthy aroma of roasted coffee cut through the lingering scent of industrial dish soap. It smelled like the morning we signed the lease on our desert dirt. It smelled like home. Julian pulled out the chair next to me and sat down. He did not ask for a detailed recounting of the confrontation. He read the posture of my shoulders and understood the siege was broken. He reached across the crisp white linen and took my hand. His palm was still rough, a testament to the real work that built our foundation. We sat together under the harsh fluorescent maintenance lights, listening to the quiet hum of the empty ballroom. The silence stretching between us was no longer a tactical weapon designed to inflict psychological damage. It was a shared, profound, earned peace. We drank our coffee at the worst table in the room, holding the deed to the entire kingdom, knowing we would never have to earn our place ever again. We often measure a family's legacy by the weight of their vault. We look at the manicured lawns, the embossed letterheads, and the trusts passed down through generations, assuming that structural financial stability equates to structural emotional health. But the saga of the Williams family strips away that gilded wallpaper to reveal the rotting wood beneath. The true inheritance a parent leaves a child is not measured in property deeds or leveraged corporate debt. It is found in the quiet, invisible architecture of their self-worth. When we reflect on the spectacular collapse of a patriarch who treated his bloodline like a board of directors, we are forced to confront an uncomfortable shadow within modern American culture. We live in a society that celebrates the relentless pursuit of upward mobility. We applaud the titans who construct empires, often turning a blind eye to the collateral damage left in their wake. Yet when this ruthless transactional mentality infiltrates the traditional family structure, the sanctuary of the home transforms into a marketplace. And in a marketplace, love is no longer a given right. It becomes a wage you must earn. Consider the fundamental duty of a parent. In a healthy, traditional family, the role of the mother and father is to provide a baseline of unconditional security. It is the promise that no matter how harsh the world outside becomes, the kitchen table remains a safe harbor. Fairness, honesty, and emotional awareness are the mortar that holds those bricks together. Richard Williams failed not because he lost his wealth, but because he lost his humanity long before the bank called in his loans. He looked at his daughter and saw a depreciating asset. He weaponized his conditional affection, utilizing his status to control, manipulate, and ultimately exile his own child when she refused to become a pawn in a corporate merger. This is the tragic flaw of transactional parenting. When you teach a child that their value is inextricably linked to their compliance and social utility, you do not raise a resilient human being, you raise a hostage. Or, if they possess enough inherent grit, you raise your most formidable adversary. True family responsibility requires the difficult, unglamorous work of emotional presence. It demands honesty, not the brutal, calculating honesty of a profit margin, but the vulnerable honesty of admitting mistakes, setting fair boundaries, and guiding a child through their own failures without withdrawing affection. When Charlotte was cast out into the blistering Arizona heat, stripped of her name and her accounts, she did not perish. She learned the vital lessons her father was too insulated to teach. She learned the value of sweat equity hauling drywall before dawn. She learned the raw, unpolished reality of fairness by negotiating with contractors and earning the respect of a crew not with a title, but with her own blistered hands. Long-term guidance for children in American culture should mirror this exact resilience. It should prepare them to navigate the desert, rather than simply handing them the keys to a fragile, climate-controlled castle. The stark contrast between the Williams family and the life Charlotte built with Julian serves as a profound testament to emotional awareness. Julian offered a steady, unwavering anchor. His affection was not billed by the hour. He did not require a return on his investment. By providing a secure emotional foundation, he allowed Charlotte the freedom to channel her survival instinct into monumental success. Parents who cultivate emotional awareness in their children equip them with the ultimate armor. A child who knows their inherent worth cannot be easily manipulated by external forces, whether those forces are abusive partners, toxic workplaces, or even their own misguided relatives. They possess an internal compass, much like the cheap plastic toy that guided Charlotte, that always points toward genuine, uncompromised truth. They understand that a relationship requiring a down payment of their dignity is a bad investment. The climax of the Williams saga is deeply satisfying, yet it carries a lingering, sorrowful note. Watching a patriarch stand shivering in the center of a rented ballroom, stripped of his power by the very daughter he discarded, is a masterclass in poetic justice. But it is also a grim reminder of the inevitable harvest of poor parenting. When you run a family like a business, you must be prepared for the day the market turns against you. If you raise your children to value leverage above loyalty, you cannot be surprised when they eventually acquire the leverage to dismantle you. Richard demanded a public submission from a daughter he had starved of affection. He attempted to pivot, offering a corporate partnership in place of a genuine apology, proving he still did not understand the currency of the human heart. His eviction was not born of malice. It was a simple, clinical foreclosure on a relationship that had been morally bankrupt for decades. Stories like this resonate because they echo the silent, invisible battles fought at dinner tables across the country. They remind us that the titles we hold in the boardroom mean nothing if the chairs at our dining table sit empty by choice. If this reflection resonates with the quiet struggles in your own history, if you have ever had to build your own foundation from the dirt because the house you were given was built on hollow promises, then you are not alone in the desert. Welcome to the community. Please take a moment to subscribe and follow the channel Grape Echo Stories. Here we give voice to the quiet triumphs and the hard-earned peace of those who refuse to be treated as line items. Share your own journey in the comments below, and let us continue to explore the profound strength it takes to rewrite your own legacy. As the dust settles on the Vanguard Hotel and the fluorescent maintenance lights illuminate the remnants of a shattered dynasty, a quiet question remains suspended in the chilled air. We spend our lives accumulating assets, protecting our reputations, and building walls to keep the unpredictable world at bay. We curate our lives for an audience, hoping to secure our place in the hierarchy. But when the music finally stops and the grand illusions we have meticulously crafted fade into the shadows, the true measure of our legacy is laid bare. It is not found in the paper we own or the fear we command. It is found in the eyes of the people sitting across from us when the room empties. Look closely at the people seated around your own table tonight. Consider the invisible threads that bind them to your side. Are they held there by the warmth of genuine unbilled affection, or are they merely waiting for their contract to expire? You might hold the deed to the house, but who actually owns the space between you? The answer, echoing softly in the quiet moments of the night, is the only inheritance that truly lasts.